When I walked into the restaurant, all the plates were empty. My family had already finished dinner. The candles on my dad's cake were still smoking. The laughter had already faded. And the first thing my mom did was hand me a folded piece of paper. "Here," she said. "This is for you." I thought it was a card. A sweet gesture maybe. Finally, a moment of belonging. But when I opened it, bold red numbers screamed back at me. $5,500. Everyone stared. My brother chuckled. "That's your share," he said. "We split the bill evenly." I blinked. I wasn't even here. Mom shrugged. "You were invited." Dad looked at me like I was an inconvenience, not his daughter. I stood there, still holding the paper, the laughter bouncing off the walls like bullets. "My name is Emily Carter. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family?" Because that night I realized something. It's not always the people who leave you that break your heart. Sometimes it's the ones who stay just to remind you you're unwanted. I paid the bill. Every cent. And when my card went through, I smiled. Because I knew. They had no idea what kind of fire they'd just lit. A few weeks later I started planning. And that was the last time they'd ever laugh at me over dinner. A week after that dinner, Mom called. Her tone was sugary sweet, the kind she only used when she wanted something. "Emily, don't forget about Christmas," she said. "As if I could," I murmured. "They wanted me to host it this year. To my house. With my food, my money, my time." After handing me a $5,500 bill for a dinner I wasn't even invited to eat. I laughed quietly, staring at the email she sent right after the call. A detailed spreadsheet titled "Christmas Budget, Emily's Portion." It was another invoice. $2,300 this time. My hands trembled. Not from anger. From a strange calm that always comes right before a storm. They had taken everything my whole life. My time, my peace, my money, my worth. When I bought my first car, Dad used it for errands. When I got my first paycheck, Mom borrowed it to cover my brother's tuition. When I got promoted, they said I owed them for raising me. And I paid. Every time. Like a fool. Not this time. I started writing list. Names, dates, details, every dollar borrowed, every moment of humiliation disguised as a joke. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about clarity. Then I remembered something. At Dad's birthday, before they laughed at me, my brother had said, "Family means sharing the load, right?" So I decided to share something too. A gift. I spent the next few days transferring all the bills, utilities, and subscriptions into their names. Every shared account. Every recurring payment. Netflix. Electric. Internet. Mortgage, autopay. All theirs. On Christmas Eve I sent them a gift-wrapped envelope. Inside a single note. "This year I wanted you to feel what family means. Love, Emily." When they called me screaming, I didn't pick up. I was sitting by the fireplace, sipping wine, watching snow fall. They thought I was their A-team. They forgot I learned how to balance accounts. And soon they'd learn how it feels when everything they've taken starts to cost them back. The storm had begun. Christmas morning came, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wake up to my family's noise. No calls. No fake "Merry Christmas" texts. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like justice. By noon my phone lit up. 20 missed calls. 14 new messages. "Emily, what did you do? The electric bill is in my name. Netflix won't work. The mortgage payment bounced. Dad is furious." I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the shift. For once they were the ones cleaning up my mess. But then, Mom showed up at my door. Her eyes were puffy, her tone desperate but rehearsed. "Sweetheart, we can fix this. We're family." I laughed. "You mean the kind that hands out invoices for dinners I wasn't invited to?" She flinched. And for the first time she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there looking small. Like the woman who used to tuck me in before she learned how to weaponize guilt. I could have slammed the door. But I didn't. I let her talk. About how Dad was embarrassed, how my brother's credit took a hit, how they were just joking that night. "Joking," she said. I watched her lips move, but I couldn't hear a word. Because all I could think was, How easily they rewrote the story when they weren't the ones bleeding. So I did something cruel. Something necessary. I forgave her. Out loud. Right to her face. Because forgiveness, when given to the undeserving, burns hotter than hate. I forgive you, I said softly. And as I closed the door, I could almost hear her heart crack under the weight of her own lies. Inside, I sat by the window watching her walk away. Snowflakes melted on her coat. She didn't look back. I thought that was the end. But the next day I got a letter from my dad's lawyer. They were suing me for financial damages and emotional distress. And that's when I realized they weren't done taking, but neither was I, because they had forgotten who taught me how to play dirty in the first place. The letter was printed on thick ivory paper, the kind that smells expensive and feels like arrogance. Carter versus Carter was typed at the top. My own last name against me. I laughed out loud. Of course my dad would make a family feud into a courtroom performance. He'd always needed an audience. They claimed I'd caused intentional emotional harm and financial loss. Apparently, transferring the bills into their names had ruined their credit stability. Dad even attached a photo of his distress. A dramatic shot of him holding a pile of envelopes. I almost admired it. Almost. But then I remembered how I used to sit in my car crying after family dinners. How they'd mock my career, my clothes, my silence. How I always let it slide because that's just how they are. Not anymore. So I hired a lawyer. A quiet woman with sharp eyes named Grace Lynn. She didn't ask many questions. Just read the file, leaned back and said, "They're underestimating you." Good. Let them. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I gathered evidence. Screenshots. Messages. Receipts. All the years of manipulation I'd archived but never confronted. The $5,500 dinner bill. The loans. The emails guilt-tripping me into paying their mortgage. And then, Grace found something. A joint account my parents had opened in my name years ago. One they'd used to funnel money for their family expenses. Tax fraud. I stared at the numbers, cold spreading through my chest. They hadn't just taken advantage of me, they'd built their comfort on my identity. When I told Grace, she nodded slowly. "We could destroy them with this," she said. "But it's your call." For 2 nights I didn't sleep. Revenge has a way of tasting sweet in your mind. Until you realize how easily it can rot your soul. But then I remembered Mom's face when she said, "That's your share." And my brother's laughter echoing through the restaurant. Well, they'd already taken too much. It was time to balance the scales. On the morning of the hearing I wore white. Not for innocence, but for burial. When the judge asked if I had any statements, I stood tall and said, "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to submit new evidence." And as my father's lawyer flipped through the pages, his face drained of color. He whispered something to Dad, something that made him sit up straight, eyes wide. For the first time in my life, my father looked scared of me. The court was silent. The game had turned. The courtroom was cold. Not just in temperature. In energy. Every click of my heels echoed through the silence. My parents sat across from me, their lawyer whispering furiously, and my brother chewing on his thumbnail like a nervous kid. I'd never seen them nervous before. Not once in my entire life. When the judge cleared his throat, everyone went still. "Miss Carter, your counsel has submitted evidence of unauthorized accounts and misuse of identity. Do you wish to elaborate?" I looked at my father. His jaw clenched, his hands white-knuckled on the table. He couldn't even look at me. So I looked at the judge instead and said, "Yes, Your Honor. For 10 years my parents used my name to pay their debts. They took my credit, my money, and my trust. And when I asked for respect, they handed me a $5,500 dinner bill." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the clerk paused mid-typing. I kept my tone steady, calm, like I'd rehearsed this my entire life. As maybe I had. "My family didn't just take advantage of me financially," I continued. "They humiliated me for sport. They called it love when they needed something and selfishness when I finally said no." My brother muttered under his breath, "Drama queen." Grace didn't even flinch. She simply said, "Let the record show that statement was made by Mr. Carter, the defendant's son. That shut him up. Then Grace handed the judge the final document. A transfer record of $42,000, taken from my payroll account over 3 years. Signed digitally by my father. When the judge turned to him, Dad tried to smile. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." Grace interrupted. "We have video evidence of him admitting to it during a family gathering." He laughed while saying, "Emily's my retirement plan." That's when the laughter in the courtroom started. Not mine. Not theirs. Just strangers. People who could finally see what I'd lived through. Dad's face went pale. Mom's tears came next. Loud, dramatic, the same act she'd perfected for years. But I didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't blink. Because I realized something right then. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was release. The judge called for a recess. And as I walked past my father's table, he hissed, "You think you've won? You just destroyed your family." I leaned down, looked him straight in the eyes and whispered, "No, Dad. You did. I'm just finishing what you started." Outside the courtroom, the air was sharp, freezing, alive. Reporters hovered near the doors and one of them shouted, "Miss Carter, do you have any comment for your family?" I smiled into the flashing cameras. "Yeah," I said. "Tell them dinner's on me." And for the first time I meant it. The story hit the news the next morning. Not a whisper. A wildfire. Daughter exposes family for identity theft. Parents face fraud investigation. My father's company suspended him within hours. Mom's charity board issued a statement about reviewing her conduct. And my brother's precious social media accounts, the ones filled with his perfect life, were suddenly flooded with comments calling him a leech. I didn't leak anything. I didn't need to. Truth spreads fast when it finally has oxygen. For years they told me to keep things in the family. Hide the bruises under jokes. Smile at birthdays. Pretend the poison was perfume. But now the masks were off. Mom called me 32 times. Then she sent a message. "Emily, you don't understand. You're ruining us." I typed back one word. "Good." 2 days later, the court froze their joint accounts. They couldn't touch their savings. Couldn't pay their mortgage. Couldn't live the way they'd always lived. On me. And just like that, the mighty Carters began to crumble. But there was one thing I didn't expect. Guilt. Not the kind that makes you regret what you did. The kind that makes you question who you've become. Every time I saw Mom's red eyes on TV, I remembered her tucking me in as a child, whispering, "You're my girl no matter what." It twisted something inside me. Revenge doesn't erase love. It just poisons it. So I couldn't stop. Because justice, once set in motion, doesn't ask how you feel. It just moves. When the fraud investigation deepened, they found more. Fake accounts, unpaid taxes, years of creative accounting. Dad was facing prison time. My brother called me next. He sounded broken. Please. Dad's losing everything. Mom can't sleep. You got what you wanted, okay?" I closed my eyes. The sound of his voice used to make me small. Now it just made me tired. "I didn't want this," I said softly. "I wanted respect." He was quiet for a long time. Then, almost whispering, he said, "You should have just let it go." I almost laughed. Let it go? That's what they told me after every wound they gave. No, I wasn't letting go. I was letting them feel. The night after that call, I stood outside their house. The same house I grew up in. And watched as movers carried out furniture marked repossession. Mom stood by the window. For the first time, she didn't look angry or proud. She looked lost. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Because sometimes, the only way to end the noise is to burn down the house that keeps echoing it. 2 weeks after the repossession, I got a letter. No envelope, just a crumpled sheet hand-delivered by my brother. It smelled faintly of Mom's perfume. The same scent she used every Sunday back when she'd kiss my forehead before church. I unfolded it slowly. "Emily, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't know how else to live. You were always the strong one, the stable one. Maybe we took too much, but it was only because we knew you'd handle it. Please, stop. You've won. We're sorry. Mom." No signature from Dad. Just hers. I read it 3 times. Every word felt like an open wound, half apology, half manipulation. And for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered that night at the restaurant. The way she'd laughed while I stood there, humiliated, clutching that $5,500 bill. That wasn't love. That was sport. So I couldn't throw the letter away. I tucked it into a drawer, right next to the stack of bills and legal documents that started all of this. It's strange how revenge doesn't end in fireworks. Sometimes it ends in silence. In the echo of your own breathing, realizing there's no one left to fight. Grace called me that evening. "The investigation's over," she said. "They're bankrupt. Your father made a deal, no jail, but everything's gone. House, savings, business." I should have felt triumph. Dad, I felt empty. Because when you build your life around being wronged, you don't know who you are when justice finally arrives. That night I drove to the ocean. It was freezing, the wind sharp, the waves black. I stood there barefoot, the cold biting my skin, and whispered to the water, "They can't hurt me anymore." The tide roared back like an answer. But in that sound I didn't hear victory. I heard loss. Because in the ashes of revenge there's always something left to bury. The version of yourself that just wanted to be loved. When I got back home I opened my drawer and pulled out Mom's letter. This time I didn't read it. I just wrote one of my own beneath it. "I forgive you. But I'll never forget who I became to survive you." I left it and signed. A mirror, not a message. Because forgiveness isn't for them. It's the only way I could walk away without carrying their ghosts. And as I sealed it shut I realized the story wasn't ending. It was transforming. And they were about to learn what real closure feels like. It was spring when I saw them again. The world had moved on, but they hadn't. Mom looked older, her hair grayer, her posture bent with the weight of things that can't be undone. Dad looked smaller, his pride stripped clean. My brother avoided my eyes the entire time. We met at a diner on the edge of town. Neutral ground. Mom had called saying, "Please, just one dinner. No arguments. Just family." Family. That word still scraped against my heart. When I walked in they all stood up, awkward smiles on faces that once laughed at me. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no courtroom. Just 4 people sitting in the ruins of what they used to call home. The waitress came and Dad tried to order for everyone. Old habits die hard. But I stopped him. "I've got it," I said, handing the waitress my card. He froze. Mom looked up, confused. "It's the least I can do," I added. A faint smile crossed my lips. "After all, I still owe you dinner, right?" The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. They all understood. This wasn't reconciliation. It was burial. Halfway through the meal Mom started crying quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just hope one day you'll remember us as more than this." I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the villain, but the frightened woman who'd mistaken control for love. The man who'd mistaken silence for respect. The boy who'd mistaken entitlement for worth. Me. The woman who mistook endurance for love. "I don't hate you," I said softly. "They say revenge makes you free, but it doesn't. It just hands you a mirror and asks if you still recognize the face inside." Mom nodded through tears. Dad whispered, "We lost everything." I stared at him. "No," I said. "You finally learned what everything costs." When the bill came I paid it without hesitation. The total? $5,500. Exactly what they'd charged me that night at Dad's birthday. Perfect symmetry. As I signed the receipt I felt something release inside me. Not rage, not triumph, just peace. The kind that comes when every score is finally settled. I stood up, slipped my coat on and looked at them one last time. "Take care of yourselves," I said. "I'm done paying." And I walked out. Outside the evening air was soft. The world smelled new again. Somewhere in the distance, laughter drifted from another restaurant. Carefree, warm, the kind that doesn't hurt. For the first time in years, I let myself smile. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped playing their game. As I got into my car I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. Whole. Unrecognizable. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. "You're free now."